are home to many trees. The forest we see here is known for a particular species of small tree. These plain-looking evergreen trees with small white flowers don't yield sweet fruits but still have a huge impact on the economies of over 60 countries and are the livelihood of 3 billion people. They are tea plants. The eastern side of the Himalayas in southwest China is blessed with abundant rainfall brought by the monsoon from the Indian Ocean. Millions of years ago, plants first ventured onto land here. Shielded behind the magnificent mountains, many plants living in this area managed to escape the freezing jaws of the bitter ice age, and tea plants are one of them. Having experienced hardship, members of this plant family still face a lot of difficulties during their lives. This seedling has managed to break out from under a thick layer of fallen leaves and grows new leaves of its own, less than 10 centimetres tall. It is still 30 metres away from the forest canopy. Now what it needs most is light. The sky is hidden by thick foliage, and only a pitiful amount of light reaches the ground after filtering through layer after layer of branches and leaves. Plants must grow taller if they want to survive here. Tea plants have powerful roots. Although the seedling above the ground is still thin and weak, under the ground its roots, which are double its size, reach deep into the soil to absorb nutrients for the plant. But there's another challenge for the tea plant. Throughout June, the monsoon has brought constant rain, and the forest is refreshed and thriving. But you can have too much of a good thing. The rainy season often lasts for half the year in this subtropical region, which could spell disaster for the plants. Their roots will start to rot if they are soaked in water for too long. But tea plants are prepared for this. Water always flows downwards, so they choose to grow on slopes, which allows excessive rainwater to flow away. This strategy helps the roots survive the long rainy season. The tea plants have grown into young trees after struggling for dozens of years to adapt to their environment. They're stronger now. They have more leaves to capture the light that escapes towards the ground and convert it into the energy they need. The leaves are the engines that boost plant growth. The top priority of these plants is to protect their leaves, which are threatened by a particular species of insect. The tea jassed feeds on tea leaves. Its body evolved a camouflage in a similar green to the colour of the leaves. Measuring only 3 to 5 millimetres, these insects are more powerful than they look. They use their needle-like mouthparts to bite through the leaf and suck the sap out of it, which damages the cells in the leaf. Causing it to curl up and wither, losing its ability to absorb light. This fast-breeding insect produces a new generation every month or so. The tea plants have their own methods of dealing with these greedy intruders. When the tea jassed begins to feast on the tea leaves, an ancient mechanism is triggered. The tea plant releases some special chemicals which send out a unique signal. They summon a helper by telling them there's food to be had. A jumping spider, the tea jassed's most feared enemy. These chemicals help the plants protect themselves from the ravages of the tea jassed, but they cannot fend off destructive bacteria and fungi lurking in the forest. These janitors of the forest are everywhere. If the leaves become infected, they start to wither, and the tea plants will eventually stop growing and die. Tea plants have armed themselves with an army of special chemicals to fight off these aggressive enemies. Caffeine, tea polyphenols and other chemical compounds in the leaves act as natural antibacterial agents, forming an invisible shield that protects the plant from serious harm. When it reaches adulthood, the once insignificant looking tea seedling is now one of the most powerful plants in the forest. It has grown into a giant with a circumference of over 3 meters, standing 25 meters tall, bathing in the light. While fully enjoying the advantages of its height, it cannot grow any taller. Direct contact with strong sunlight harms its leaves, so it must maintain a safe distance from the top of the canopy. Tea plants have made every effort to ensure the survival of their species. The seeds of the tea plant contain the future of the species, but they require at least 1.5 years to ripen. And such a long period of maturation means that the flowers often bloom again while the seeds are still ripening, like pregnant mothers who already have older children. When the brown hulls crack open, the seeds throw themselves down to the ground, where they will wait for their chance to germinate. Years have passed. The tree plant has thrived and multiplied from one individual into a large family, quietly enjoying their success. This would have been the end of their life story if people had not discovered the secret use of their leaves. They developed tea into a beverage enjoyed all over the world. Humans have probably seen these plants countless times before they started paying attention to them. Some believe that mankind's interest in tea plants was first sparked by animals, like monkeys, that collected and ate the tea leaves, and then decided to give tea leaves a try out of curiosity. We can't go back to the moment that mankind first put tree leaves into their mouths, but some ancient ethnic groups have inherited this behaviour and preserved it in their diet. The Jino people in Xishuangbanna, Yunnan province, where tea plants originated, enjoy eating tea leaves and have a traditional dish of tea leaf salad. The Jino people make full use of edible herbs, including tea leaves, found around the tea plantation. They like to refresh themselves during breaks from work. As skilled herb collectors, their list of edible herbs extends to 40 or 50 varieties. These ingredients are then pounded in bamboo sections and seasoned with spices. This local delicacy is one of the successful outcomes of people's experiments with tea leaves. Legend has it that Shenong, the divine farmer, discovered the health benefits of tea leaves, prompting many to use them as a medicinal herb. The domestication of tea plants was introduced to meet the increase in demand. Shangshujing in Fengqing County in Yunnan Province is home to an enormous tea tree called the Jinqiu, or beautiful tea tree. As one of the earliest cultivated tea plants, it still wows onlookers by towering over 10 meters tall. But it is already shorter than its ancestors, one of the results of domestication. Tea plants originally grew in regions neighbouring tropical forests. As the temperature and humidity dropped further north, the environment became unsustainable for trees. Only lower growing shrubs managed to adapt to the new environment and establish themselves. As people continued to explore new territories, they brought tea seeds to places thousands of miles away from home. The earliest record of cultivating tree plants appears in the Encyclopedia of Sichuan. It describes Wu Lizhen from the Western Han Dynasty planting 7 tea trees on Mending Mountain in Sichuan Province, spawning the legacy of Mending Ganlu tea. In that time, tea plants underwent a tremendous change. Their height was reduced to a few feet and their leaves were thinner. A world away from the wild, towering tea trees of the forest. To adapt to a more temperate climate, tea plants started branching soon after germination. They abandoned their tree form and became shrubs less than a metre tall. Their leaves grew smaller, with fuzz on the vulnerable tea buds to keep them warm in low temperatures. With a waxy coating on their leaves, these tea shrubs exhibit a much higher tolerance to winter cold than tea trees. Although they're the shortest plants in the tea family, they're the toughest. People observed the evolution of tea plants over time, and tea shrubs are now favoured over tea trees. They are more resilient and make tea picking easier. As a close companion of humans, tea plants quickly expanded their territory. Chinese people, who were first to discover the benefits of tea and domesticated it, have introduced the plant to every corner of their vast land. In the Tang Dynasty in the 8th century, the presence of tea plants could be found in almost half the country, from the Qin Mountains in the north to the middle and lower reaches of the Yangtze River in the south. Their cousins, such as tea oil camellia and the common Japanese camellia, have never enjoyed such success. What makes tea plants so special? Modern technology has enabled scientists to produce a genetic map of the tea plant and discover its secrets.
Compared to other plants, tea plants have undergone 2 whole genome duplications, as well as many tandem exon duplications in their evolutionary history, facilitating a significant increase in genes that play important roles in tea-specific biosynthesis. However, in the leaves of tea oil camellias, the number of these genes is much lower, which results in a relatively bland taste. You can't make beverages out of them as you do with tea leaves.
DNA replication occurred as tea plants evolved their resistance to natural threats. As the number of enzyme genes increased during this complicated process, 3 special metabolites gained dominance in tea leaves. These 3 substances completely changed the fate of tea plants.
Tea leaves are rich in taste-inducing chemical compounds like catechins, theanine, and caffeine.
As a natural antibacterial agent, catechins can protect people from harmful microbes. Like the monkeys in the forest, people love the refreshing, invigorating effects of caffeine. Theanine produces a pleasant, savoury flavour, similar to monosodium glutamate. Mankind has been captivated by the charming combination of this trio. This beverage leaves the drinker feeling invigorated, with a lingering sweetness in their mouth. Tea was gradually set apart from other medicinal tonics and took on a new identity as a beverage. This change broadened the use of tea leaves. Most people don't drink medicinal tonics every day, but a cup of tea is now considered by many to be a daily necessity. Driven by mankind's new craving for tea, tea plants began an unprecedented expansion. Storage is a problem for fresh tea leaves. So tea processing methods were introduced to preserve their flavour. There is a class of tea in Ya'an, Sichuan province, which boasts a long history. Known as Tibeti, these pan-fried tea leaves turn from their original bright green colour to a dark black after undergoing a vigorous fermentation process. Dozens of tea leaves are plucked from the plant. The production of Tibeti does not require careful selection of the leaves. With their energy supply cut off from the plant, certain enzymes are activated, triggering the process of enzymatic oxidation. The heat from the fire plays a key role in stopping this process in its tracks. Tea leaves are thoroughly fried in a burning hot cast iron pan and steamed until they start to turn brown. The heat prevents the enzymes from working by blocking their reaction with oxygen. Without this chemical reaction, the flavour compounds in the leaves are preserved. This makes the overall taste more mellow and acceptable to the palate. The leaves are dried to make storage easier. The leaves are rendered a lifeless brown, but the essence of tea is saved. The processed leaves are then pressed into bricks and cakes, which keep their flavour for several months, and are transported to the Tibetan plateau thousands of kilometres away. The locals make butter tea by mixing the tea leaves with yak butter, which forms an important part of the Tibetan daily diet. Processed tea leaves have been given a much longer lifespan, so they are able to travel to places much further afield, reaching as far as the southwest and northwest borders of China, and even entering the lands of Bhutan, Nepal, India, and Central Asia. The popularity of tea gave rise to tea-related cultural events. A tea practice called a tea show, similar to modern latte art, was developed in the Song dynasty and was popular among men of letters. Expensive tea cakes with exquisite dragon and phoenix patterns carved on them were offered to the emperors. Emperor Zhu Yanzhang of the Ming dynasty pushed for the nationwide availability of loose-leaf tea, prompting the most important reforms in the history of the tea industry. A new class of tea was invented during these reforms, which would conquer palates worldwide over the next 2 centuries. But this process required a powerful assistant, a role which happened to be of mutual benefit to the British Empire. In 1610, a type of brownish red leaf tea produced on Wuyi Mountain in Fujian province was introduced to Europe from China by Dutch traders. As the combination of a mystical plant and a mysterious culture, black tea caused a sensation in Western countries, especially the British Empire, which was then at the height of its power. Tea was initially a drink reserved for the nobility in England, but its popularity quickly expanded. In this special period of history, tea became a daily necessity for a whole class, eventually grown to be a common drink enjoyed by all English people. The turning point was the Industrial Revolution that took place in the 19th century. The creation of factories gave rise to the birth of an industrial working class. Industrial workers worked long hours and needed to remain focused, as constantly moving assembly lines did not allow for mistakes. Tea helped them refresh themselves and offered them comfort. The British government was in urgent need of a huge supply of tea leaves in order to fuel this revolution, and this would usher in a new industrial era, both for Britain and the rest of the world. This little green shelter on the street sells cups of tea in simple styrofoam cups for less than £1. Tea is still the most popular beverage here.
Good morning. Cup of tea? Sugar? Tea, 1 sugar. Good morning. The cab drivers, the police come here, the ambulance people come here, the local cleaners, everybody. So it's like a centre for the local community.
There is a historical reason behind the cheap prices. The St John's Wood Shelter was first established for working class hackney cab drivers in London in 1875. Initially open only to cab drivers, hence the name cab shelter, it is now frequented by workers of all kinds to refresh themselves with a cup of tea during their breaks from work.
It's so wonderful.
The caffeine found in tea is a stimulant. Enriched with sugar and milk, tea can quickly boost the energy level of the workers. Seeing the benefits of this beverage, the government encouraged the building of tea houses like the Green Sheds, which in turn helped the workers get through the day. The workers contributed to the success of the Industrial Revolution, and a once agrarian world was replaced by an industrial one. Britain became an even bigger world power following the Industrial Revolution. It fought wars worldwide to expand and maintain its empire. Tea became a necessity for British people during this time of chaos. They even invented a gadget to allow them to fit tea time into their battle schedule. In the Tank Museum in Dorset, you can see that the inside of these battle tanks were already pretty crowded, but English soldiers still found a way to squeeze iron ration boxes into the vehicles in which to carry their tea.
Put the tea inside your mug and then use the boiling vessel where we get hot water coming out, already boiled, to make our cup of tea. Sugar, milk, all in the ration pack as well, and we don't have to get outside the vehicle, so we're safe inside and still got our brew of tea.
A hot cup of tea gave the soldiers warmth and strength during their bloody battles.
And that's how important, and it still is today. Still in the British Army, your ration pack comes with tea bags.
Before tea could be lavishly distributed to soldiers as rations, it was so rare and expensive when it was first introduced to Britain that it could trigger wars. One example is the Boston Tea Party, which escalated into the American Revolution. The British, pushing for the globalization of tea, managed to smuggle tea plants out of China with the help of one man and a piece of land. This man's name was Robert Fortune, a plant hunter. Hired by the British East India Company, he secretly travelled to China, often disguised as a Chinese merchant, many times during the 1840s, seeking plants that would produce the best tea. Eventually, Fortune collected 2,000 tea seedlings and 17,000 seeds, which embarked on a journey their ancestors could never have dreamed of. Travelling beyond the mountains and across the seas to reach their final destination in India on the other side of the Himalayas. Tea plants found themselves in a country totally different from their native land. Luckily, Darjeeling in the Lesser Himalayas was an environment quite similar to that of their home in China, and the tea plants happily settled there. The plants had a special pollination system in place, which laid the foundation for their quick adaptation. In the eyes of botanists, the flowers of tea plants are perfect. They have both male and female organs. This means that pollination can be achieved with just the help of the wind. But the tea flowers choose to accept pollen grains only from other plants and not from their own stamens. This mechanism makes pollination a lot harder, but it has a tremendously positive influence on the whole species, as it facilitates genetic exchange among different plants and produces stronger offspring. After generations of adaptation, tea plants have now firmly taken root in India, which has become a second home to them.
This is the oldest tea plantation in Darjeeling, Alubari, bang in front of my house. Wow.
Unlike carefully planned modern tea gardens, the tea plants here grow randomly in the garden, and you can tell that they were planted manually. The history of the tea garden has been passed down by people living in the neighbourhood.
Today in Darjeeling we have 87 such tea plantations, and most of the plantations have a lot of Chinese bushes.
Alubari is still producing tea today, and Darjeeling has become one of the top 3 most famous regions for black tea in the world. The success of tea plantations in India proved that globalization of tea was possible. But more challenges lay in wait. Tea plants needed a much larger consumer base if it was to be taken any further. But traditional tea processing was costly, and conquering the global market required an increase in lower-cost manufacturing. Industrialisation allowed for the mass production of tea, and the tea gardens of India were transformed into industrialised plantations. Tea plants became a crop like rice, and factors that could influence their growth were strictly monitored, including height, spacing, and the number of irrigation channels. Viewed from above, individual plants fill the plantation like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle. Shade trees were carefully selected and arranged around the plantation. They are dome-shaped with short, thin leaves so that the fallen leaves won't accumulate on the tea plants and affect the photosynthesis process. These tea plants have all matured at roughly the same time, providing enough of the raw materials to be used in tea manufacture. They are sent to the factory after picking. Chinese people prefer to keep the tea leaves intact, but here they are shredded. Workers pour dried leaves into the grinding machine, where they are crushed into a fine powder that will better preserve the tea for transportation. This crushing method was heralded as a breakthrough invention in tea production. It contributed to the great enlightenment of the Industrial Revolution. The powder is piled together, turning a brownish red after being subjected to heat-induced oxidation. Although they look totally different from processed tea leaves in China, this tea is still made following the same principle of oxidation used in orthodox black tea manufacturing.
Next, oil is very bright but thin to taste.
The transportation of tea leaves is just as labour-intensive. To reduce transport costs, the British East India Company built railways across India, which in turn spurred the development of railway transport in India. From plantation to processing, each step of tea manufacturing has been closely monitored to reduce costs. Tea was once a beverage unheard of in India, but now the streets are lined with tea stands. Encouraged by India's success, more countries joined the tea trade. Native to Asia, tea plants were introduced to Europe in the 1830s, to Africa at the beginning of the 20th century, and to the Americas and Oceania in the 1920s. Nowadays, tea plants are cultivated in more than 60 countries worldwide, and tea is enjoyed by 3 billion people. Most of the time, tea plays the role of a pleasant beverage. But in Japan, it was given a new identity as a source of spiritual inspiration. This practice was started by monks. They discovered the refreshing effects of tea and welcomed it as a drink to calm the mind in preparation for enlightenment. The mild and serene nature of tea made it the perfect combination for monks. These monks, who led such modest lives, became among the most enthusiastic advocates of tea. Back in the Tang dynasty, some Japanese monks tried to bring tea back to their homeland, but tea was still largely unknown in Japan at that time. Tea was popularized in Japan by the book How to Stay Healthy by Drinking Tea, written by Isai, a Japanese monk who lived during the Song dynasty. Monks drank tea to enable meditation, and tea became a medium for spiritual enlightenment, which was later developed into the Japanese tea ceremony. Reserved for only the most distinguished guests, the Japanese tea ceremony is held in specially constructed rooms with tatami matting. The tea ceremony emphasizes harmony with nature. The Toyobo Tea House, located at Kenenji, a Buddhist temple in Kyoto, where Isai was the founding abbot, is imbued with peace. It is credited with being a place that makes its visitors feel like they have walked out of the noisy city and into a forest. The garden through which one passes to enter the tea room is called a roji. It features a path made of stepping stones that separates the tea room from the outside world. When the guests step into the garden and walk along the path lined with plants, their minds become less disturbed and more relaxed. Serving and receiving tea is no longer the main purpose of the tea ceremony. What people enjoy more is the isolation from the chaotic outside world. The Japanese idiom, ichigo ichi-e, which means for this time only, is closely associated with the tea ceremony. It reminds people to cherish every gathering they take part in as a moment that will never be repeated. Each step of tea preparation is made into a ritual. Guests enjoy tea made from the same kettle, freed from the identities imposed on them. People enjoy the company of friends with open hearts, surrounded by artwork and flowers chosen for the season. As the aroma of tea gradually fills the room, people contemplate nature and life. Tea is no longer just an ordinary drink, but part of human consciousness. It seems that tea plants are overshadowed by the fame their leaves have garnered. Tea leaves are celebrated for their taste. They have given rise to tea cultures, boosted economic development, and triggered great wars. Tea has become part of our lives, and we tend to overlook the other parts of the plant when we talk about them. But the truth is that tea leaves are just a well-received gift given to mankind by tea plants, and their species have thrived in return. This plant, that originated in the forests of southwest China, was named Thea sinensis in 1753 by the Swedish botanist Carl Linnaeus, meaning Chinese tea.